Antibiotics are drugs that treat and prevent bacterial infections in humans and animals. In the mid-1940s, it was discovered that antibiotics could also be used to enhance growth in animals by feeding antibiotics in subtherapeutic concentrations to livestock. This discovery had a major impact on U.S. animal producers, who were struggling to keep up with the rising demand for animal protein at the time. Therefore, antibiotics for growth promotion, also known as AGPs, were integrated into many intensive livestock and poultry productions. Between the 1950s to 1980s, AGPs proved to effectively decrease production costs, such as feed, labor, and capital inputs, for some operations. Many producers were also able to avoid financial penalty at the market because AGPs decreased variability in animal weights and sizes. AGPs were proven to be most effective for young animals, or animals raised in less than optimal production environments, because they are more susceptible to disease. By the 2000s, evidence indicated that AGPs were no longer as effective in growth promotion as they once were. Furthermore, AGPs were found to be linked to antibiotic resistance in animals, which can be transferred to humans in 3 ways. First, through the release of antibiotic-resistant bacteria to the environment. Second, resistance transmission through the food chain, that is, eating meat that was produced using AGPs. And third, the acquisition of resistant strains through direct contact with food animals. Antibiotic resistance results from the misuse or overuse of antibiotics and is a pressing health concern because antibiotic-resistant bacteria is much more difficult to treat and can spread to other people more easily. The European Union chose to ban AGPs in 2006. On the other hand, the U.S. has only created guidelines for AGP use, where the FDA advises producers to voluntarily reduce or eliminate AGPs in animal production. Denmark, one of the world's leading pork exporters who is part of the European Union, found no long-run productivity losses after the ban of AGPs. The problem with AGPs is that even though there is enough evidence to prove they lead to antibiotic resistance in animals, which can then be transferred to humans, researchers have not been able to quantify the magnitude of AGP risk to human health. This situation leaves policymakers with the difficult task of weighing the costs and benefits to society associated with the potential ban of AGPs in U.S. animal production. AGP use in U.S. pork and poultry productions creates a negative externality. The negative externality is the increase in antibiotic resistance, which is transferred from food animals to humans. Antibiotic resistance is a social cost because humans are no longer able to use antibiotics to fight off bacterial illnesses. A graph can be used to further explain this negative externality. An external cost, such as the cost of antibiotic resistance from the use of AGPs in animal production, makes the marginal social cost curve, MSC, higher than the marginal private cost curve, MPC. The socially efficient output occurs where the marginal social cost equals the marginal social benefit, or MSB. This occurs at point B, with the quantity Q1 and price P1, which has a lower level of output than the market equilibrium output at point A, with the quantity Q and price P. A welfare loss develops because the marginal cost to society of using AGPs in animal production is greater than the marginal benefit to society. At market equilibrium Q, marginal social costs, shown by point C, are greater than marginal social benefits, shown by point A. So therefore, there is a net loss to society.
Some producers argue that there are incentives to using AGPs, such as the increased growth rate, increase in feed conversion ratios, and the increased labor and capital productivity. However, post-2000 studies have indicated that these productivity gains from AGPs are lower than indicated by earlier research. AGP use increased average daily weight by 0.5% and feed efficiency by 1.1%, much less than the two-digit improvements reported in the 1980s.
Other producers have incentives to eliminate AGPs because their buyers, such as McDonald's and Purdue Foods, have begun demanding antibiotic-free meat. This change in demand is likely the result of changing consumer tastes and preferences. These producers receive an incentive or compensation for producing without AGPs through significantly higher contract fees. Graphs can be used to further explain these changes in preferences and demand for antibiotic-free meat. For example, this indifference curve represents a consumer's tastes and preferences. As you can see, meat produced without antibiotics is preferred to meat produced with antibiotics. This is shown by the very steep indifference curve. Consumers are willing to give up a large amount of meat that is produced with AGPs, shown by the very steep vertical green dotted line, for a very small amount of meat that is produced without AGPs, indicated by the very small horizontal green dotted line. Due to consumer preferences for antibiotic-free meat, meat buyers such as McDonald's and Purdue Foods increase their demand for antibiotic-free meat. This is shown by the shift to the right of the demand curve, from D to D1. The increase in demand results in an increase in both price and quantity, shown by P to P1 and Q to Q1, for antibiotic-free meat. The higher price compensates pork and poultry producers for eliminating AGPs from their production. Denmark is the classic case that proves that the ban of AGPs results in no long-term loss in overall productivity and no significant increase in price of pork or poultry. Also, the costs incurred from banning AGPs were often offset by the savings from not using AGPs. Banning AGPs in the U.S. would have different effects on producers depending on their methods of production and operating environment. It is important to note that studies and estimations of an AGP ban in the U.S. have found significantly different production cost increases.
Recent USDA estimates on the ban of AGPs in U.S. pork and poultry production indicate limited effects. The quantity produced would, at most, decrease by 1.08% in the pork industry and 1.12% in the poultry industry, assuming a 3% reduction in supply due to discontinuation of AGPs. The consequent increase in wholesale prices would range from less than 1% to at most 2.6%. It seems as though a large number of people, including experts, consumers, restaurants, and grocery stores, are demanding more naturally produced food and therefore would like to see AGPs eliminated from animal production. The problem is that there is not a clear definition for antibiotic-free meat in the U.S. Some disease prevention antibiotics can be used for enhancing growth because they are authorized for both growth promotion and disease prevention. This dual authorization makes it hard to regulate whether producers are using these antibiotics for disease prevention or growth enhancement. If the U.S. were to ban or at least to regulate AGP use, then the government would have to create a group to monitor producers. This could end up being quite costly for the government and animal producers. On the flip side, the ban of AGPs or the regulation of AGP use could potentially increase export demand for U.S. meat products, thereby mitigating the cost of banning or regulation. The ban of AGPs could have a negative effect on producers who rely on traditional methods of production, like those who use AGPs, because they will likely experience an increase in costs of production. It is likely that these producers will either exit the industry or upgrade their operations to be more sanitary.